Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. And today is the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the first USS New Jersey. The first USS New Jersey was a Virginia-class pre-dreadnought battleship. Her hull number was BB-16. The Virginia class were iconic because instead of having the 8-inch secondary battery on the four corners of the superstructure in something of a hexagonal arrangement with the main battery guns, they moved some of the 8-inch guns on top of the 12-inch turrets, which had worked relatively well on the Kearsarge in Kentucky, been abandoned for a couple of years because we went away from the 8-inch secondary battery following the Spanish-American War, and then came back after the Russo-Japanese War, and it didn't quite work as well on these ships. Needless to say, by World War I, both the advent of dreadnought and the poor placement of the secondary battery had rendered these ships fairly obsolete. Nonetheless, New Jersey and her other sister ships of the various pre-dreadnought classes provided convoy escorts, they did some troop transport stuff, and they did a lot of training as the Navy expanded during the war. After the war, they were all decommissioned and were probably going to end up scrapped. And then the Washington Naval Treaty came out and guaranteed that these had to be scrapped or otherwise disposed of. So, BB-16 was one of several obsolete battleships that was chosen for Billy Mitchell's tests of air power against sea power. So he was going to use Army bombers to attempt to bomb battleships to prove that air power could work as a deterrent against sea power, and that aircraft had gotten to the point where they had a long enough range and could carry a heavy enough payload that they could seriously threaten battleships. This was very important because the Navy had a bunch of obsolete battleships and they weren't going to continue building them because of the Washington Naval Treaty, so they were not going to get more obsolete battleships. The ones they were allowed to keep, they were going to have to keep for a while. So, however, in 20 years when the battleship holiday was up, they were going to have to start developing new ships. So they needed to know what the most modern weapon systems could do against their battleships so they could modify that armor in the future. Some battleships, like the USS Washington, was expended in naval gunnery tests, so Texas and some other complete battleships were used to shell that one, and the US Navy discovered that a lot of damage was done by shells that missed the target short but continued their trajectory underwater, and so hit the armored belt, or rather missed the armored belt by hitting the hull beneath it, and so that becomes a critical part of the armoring of Iowa-class battleships. And this New Jersey proved that aerial bombs could be effective against battleships, and as a short-range pre-dreadnought battleship, her deck armor was not that great. So, it proved that future ships, such as the Battleship New Jersey that we're on today, would need stronger deck armor. Today is a major milestone for Battleship New Jersey and her namesake ship. If you would like to celebrate a major milestone by flying an American flag over Battleship New Jersey, we can accommodate that. There's a link in the description below to our online store where you can purchase a flag that has been flown over the ship on a requested date. Be sure to request your date in advance so we can make sure that we have enough flags flown on that day for you. Otherwise, you'll have to wait until that date comes up again. And so testing the most modern weapons against real-world targets is one of the reasons that SINKEXs are so important. SINKEX is just the shorthand version of sinking exercise. It's one of the many ways of disposal that the Navy has for decommissioned ships. For example, post-World War I, with the Washington Naval Treaty, the Navy had a ton of ships that they had to dispose of in a very short period of time. So some of these ships were demilitarized and used for other functions. Kearsarge famously is turned into a crane ship. Oregon is turned into one of the first museum ships. Many are sold for scrap. However, the influx of all that steel going on the market, this is like 15,000 tons of steel, and they didn't know it at the time, but it was pre-nuclear steel. Didn't mean anything value-wise until you got post-nuclear steel many years later. But scrapping over a dozen ships like this drove the price of scrap iron way down. So the Navy couldn't do that with all their ships. And so some of them, like New Jersey, were expended in these tests, which were vital for testing some of the most modern armor against some of the most modern bombs to determine how to modify it for the future. SyncXs are still used today. So for example, Battleship New Jersey herself got to participate in a SyncX in April of 1986. The Navy wanted to test the new weapon system, specifically the Harpoon anti-ship missile that Battleship New Jersey was equipped with. Harpoons could also be launched from submarines through the torpedo tubes and from aircraft. And so they wanted to test a combined arms operations in which a battleship battle group, in this case Battle Group Romeo, centered around New Jersey, with New Jersey as the ship in charge of anti-surface ship warfare, how effective they would be when combined with Air Force aircraft and submarines and other things. So they took the decommissioned submarine Grayback, sister ship of USS Growler in New York Harbor, which is a museum ship you can still visit today. Grayback is towed out somewhere in the South China Sea off the Philippines, and New Jersey puts the first of what would be at least 3 Harpoon missiles into her before she sinks. And so Battleship New Jersey's crew never got a real-life experience to fire their missiles. However, with the Cold War ramping up, they needed that sort of experience. How do you target and get the permission and fire missiles at a target, and what is that like on board? So the Navy uses SyncXs both as training exercises for the crew on board and as testing both of their weapons and the doctrine for how to use them. This large-scale model of BB-16 was originally built by Salvatore Baglieri and donated to the museum. Now, unfortunately, at some point during the museum period, before I started working here, this model was badly damaged, probably while it was being moved into a round of exhibits, something like that. So one of our volunteers, Gene Thatcher, took the model home and was able to restore it to how it would have originally looked when Salvatore completed it. And so this model is in our collection, waiting to go back out on display at some point in the future. Do you think SyncXs are a good way of disposing of valuable government assets like these? Let us know in the comments section down below. What do you think is the ideal method of disposal for ships? Remember, they can't all be turned into museum ships. The market isn't that big. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. Remember, you can support us by buying a flag flown on a certain date, linked in the description below. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find about the museum and our channel. Thanks for watching.